This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joire.
Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joire, and today is Wednesday, December 26, 2018. That is the last show of the year, and I have a special guest for that, of course. My guest is Andrii Degeler. Andrii writes for tech.eu, which you'll tell us a little more about at the end of the show.
Yeah.
And you have worked also for Engadget. You've written for them for a while in the past. And so you are pretty connected in the mobile space. And I thought it'd be really interesting to have a conversation today about what we expect to see in 2019 in terms of tech, in terms of trends, especially on the mobile front. What is the thing you expect to be very popular next year?
Okay. My general prediction, I think, and that's also prediction and hope at the same time, is that we are going to see more weird stuff. And I don't really want to sound like an old man, but I do sometimes miss the 2000s and all the tons of weird phones that were coming up back then. And that's also when I used to write a lot about phones. And I do see that right now it's something that's also happening in the industry. And that comes from foldable phones, all these new selfie cameras that are just holes in the phones and stuff like that, everything.
Yeah, I think form factors are really interesting right now. Let's dive into that a little more. Like we've seen some interesting form factors this year, right? Yep. Again, the kind of trend and the goal has been to do a full screen phone, right? With zero notches, zero holes, zero bezel, basically full screen covering the entire front of the phone, maximum display, minimum packaging, yeah? And I think some phones have come close, but to achieve that, there are, some interesting concepts have been taken. So going through them really quickly, there's been slider phones, like the motorized Oppo Find X, like the Mi Mix 3, like the Honor Magic 2. They've been phones with a pop-up selfie camera, like the Vivo Next S. They've been phones with dual displays, like the ZTE Nubia X, I think. And that basically where there's no front camera, you use the back display with the main camera for taking selfies. And then there is, of course, been the latest trend, which has started with the Galaxy A8s from Samsung and continued with the Nova 4 from Huawei and the View 20 from Honor, which is to punch a little hole through the display for the front-facing camera. And of course, there's strong rumors that the Galaxy S10 next year and Note 10 will have a similar display. So do you think we're going to see yet another form factor to add to that? Or what do you think is going to happen? I
mean, first of all, let's face it, the hole looks much better than the notch.
I agree 100%.
Can we agree on that?
Yeah, I think I'm really looking forward to these displays with the hole punch hole, whatever you want to call them, because honestly, I'm actually excited that we're seeing mid-range phones like the Nova 4 and the Galaxy A8s, because obviously the View 20 is going to be Honor's flagship for the short-term future. And I wouldn't be surprised if Huawei obviously does this with the P30 and the Mate 30 next year, and maybe the Mate 30 will be a complete full screen display. Maybe they'll surprise us with something else. I'm calling it now, and this is my first prediction. We're going to see a lot of phones with a punch hole punch, whatever you want to call it, the hole through the display with the front camera behind it. And I agree with you, it looks better. But my other prediction, and I want to hear your take on this, is that we're going to get the next evolution of that on one of the flagships this year, possibly in the later part of the year, like maybe the Mate 30. And what it's going to be is the hole punch hole, whatever, but the display is actually on top of the camera. So what I'm saying is that the OLED will go black in an area, and the camera is behind that OLED and will take the picture through the actual OLED screen. And, kind of like the current in-display fingerprint readers, the optical ones from OnePlus and from Huawei on the 6T and the Mate 20 Pro, where there's actually a part underneath the OLED that has the sensor. And if you look carefully on the screen, you can and shine a light through the screen, you can actually kind of see the sensor a little bit. So I'm thinking something like that with a front camera, where the camera has maybe a more sensitive sensor and a faster f-stop to compensate for the fact that it's really a neutral density filter you're putting in front of the camera. So you're reducing the amount of light it can gather. But that the display would be a full screen display with no visible hole until you take a photo with the front camera, where that little circle would go black because the OLED would go black in that spot. The picture gets taken and processed. That is my prediction.
Great. This sounds absolutely great. And actually, I do believe it. I do believe it. I do agree with it. And I think, you know what? There is one big problem that this thing is going to solve. And the problem is when you take a selfie and people who don't know your phone would just awkwardly look into a wrong corner.
Exactly.
Then you can put the camera in the actual middle of the screen, right? And then everybody would just by reflex look into the middle of the screen, and all the selfies will come out perfect.
Yeah, and so that's kind of what I'm getting to. I think this is going to be a really interesting alternative to, what we're seeing now. And the challenge behind that will be to make, as little loss of light through that display as possible.
Yeah.
And that will require more sensitive sensors and faster f-stops on the front-facing camera. But we've already seen front-facing cameras as f/1.7, f/1.8. We know that f/1.5 is currently the state of the art for cameras in the rear, like with the Galaxy.
Yeah.
So why not make an f/1.5 front camera that has larger pixels, like maybe 1.5 micron or even 2 micron pixels? It doesn't have to be super high res, maybe cap it to 6, 7 megapixels, 8 megapixels at most, and have large sensor array. And especially if you can hide the size of the sensor, right? With the display, then you can make that hole bigger in software when you activate it, basically. So I'm hoping that we're going to see something like that from one of the big players. And then
it sounds very viable.
And then we'll have a full display phone that has no moving parts, that doesn't have a secondary screen or some slider or something. Yeah, that's my take. But
Perfect.
The notch, I think, is going to continue as well. I think we're going to see more teardrop notches on the mid-range and low end.
Like OnePlus did, right?
Yeah, like OnePlus did, like Vivo did with the V11, like we've seen, the Mate 20, regular Mate 20 and Mate 20X. I think that's also a viable thing. It's certainly more aesthetically pleasing than the big notches we're seeing on some of these devices. So
for sure,
I'm excited about this full screen thing we're going to see. But here's one thing that I want, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you noticed that only Apple so far has managed to make a phone that has, whether it's IPS or OLED, that doesn't have a chin at all? Like a tiny little, like you look at all the other phones that are quote unquote full screen displays and maybe have a notch, but the bottom part of the display always has a bit of a chin, because that's where they have to fold the electronics for the driving the display. And Apple has obviously made a custom OLED since the iPhone 10 that doesn't have that bottom border or bottom chin, and they've managed to achieve that with the 10R, which is kind of amazing. But even look at the Huawei Mate 20 Pro. It has a tiny little bit. It has a bit more bezel at the bottom edge, and so I'm really, really hoping that somebody will impress us this year by doing this right. Hopefully Samsung.
Yeah, I mean, from what we've seen so far, even if Apple is the first to achieve a certain thing in terms of how the phone is built, one way or the other, the Chinese companies, the Korean companies will basically catch up real soon. So I do think we're gonna see chinless phones really soon next year. It's not that actually it bothers me, honestly, though. I'm totally fine with a small chin.
I mean, it doesn't bother me either, but I find it odd that we're a year and a half after Apple's done it first, and nobody's managed to copy that yet.
Also, if I have to choose between a chin and a 3.5 millimeter jack, I would go for the latter.
I agree. We're going to have a discussion about that in a minute. But I think that I feel like, this, we're very close to 100%. Well, not 100%, but 99%, because it's still going to need some sort of border at some point to contain the display at this point. But 99% as a screen ratio with no chin, no hole. I mean, maybe just a punch hole and no notch. And I think that, a lot of people have asked me, but Miriam, where do you put the earpiece? And if you look at how the Essential phone did it, if you look at how the, a lot of phones are doing, the OnePlus 6T, you can embed that speaker in the metal frame around the display. Just all you need is a tiny little 0.5 millimeter slit in terms of height, and then maybe you'll have it about 5 centimeter long, and then you get your earpiece. The other alternative is piezo, where the entire display vibrates, and then you put it, you can't hear anything unless you put it to your ear, and then it vibrates via bone conduction, right? Some companies have done that.
This sounds very futuristic, I have to say.
No, it's actually not futuristic. There's a few phones out there with that feature already, Chinese phones, but rewind even further. Do you remember what the first kind of quote-unquote bezel-less phone was, in the sense that it had 3 sides that were bezel-less and 1 side that wasn't? You're probably going to say Xiaomi Mi Mix original, and you're probably headed in the right direction. But you can rewind even before that. Sharp in Japan made a series of phones that had a basically 1 or 2 millimeter edge on the left, right, and top, and then had a relatively large chin at the bottom that contained the front-facing camera. And one of these came to the US as a mid-range phone on Sprint called the Aquos Crystal. This is back in 2014. And Kyocera, they've actually pioneered this piezo speaker technology. They had it in one of their Android phones as far back as 2011 or 12. I remember going to CTIA when I worked at Engadget in New Orleans and having a prototype demo from Kyocera of a phone that you had no speaker, and when you held it, you couldn't hear anything until you tapped it to your ear, and then it would, work through bone conduction. It wasn't very good at the time. And granted, the Sharp Aquos, whatever it was, the Sprint mid-range phone in 2014 didn't really sound that great either. But I think that I haven't heard the newer ones that the Chinese manufacturers have made this year, but I think that technology's probably improved, and we're probably going to get to a point where that technology is viable,
Yeah, that sounds viable already, I guess. If it did happen before. I'm not sure Kyocera is still making any phones. They made CDMA phones, right? Mostly.
Yeah, I think they're still making CDMA some cheap phones for the US market.
We don't get them in Europe.
Oh, never in Europe, no. No, they were pretty much a US only thing, mostly through Sprint, in fact. So, yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. But honestly, I feel like my first proposition, having the slit in the metal frame right above the actual glass of the display, in that tiny little microscopic top bezel, would be probably the better approach. It's probably easier to do that. And I'm actually surprised that a phone like what is it? The Magic 2, the Honor Magic 2, you actually have to open it because the speaker is in the slider. Like, I'm surprised I didn't put it in the edge of the rim, right? Instead of putting it in the slider like they did.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, it does sound more doable putting the speaker into the frame, because it's more like an iterative thing to do, right? Just like making something better, squeezing something into a certain space, rather than going for the whole bone conducting tech.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens on the display front. Of course,
I'm very excited about that.
We might see a folding phone from Samsung. I mean, they've shown a prototype finally. Well, they've shown many prototypes of the year, but they seem to be more serious about showing a prototype at the Dev conference back in October, November. And it was, there was support for Android announced by Google at the same time. So I think one of them, or maybe Huawei and Samsung, both will have some sort of folding phone. What's your take on those phones? I'm not too excited about this.
So folding phones, I do believe they will arrive. of course. I mean, it could still be a flop, but I do believe that we will see something at the price point of, what is it, 1770 American dollars, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be expensive. We're going to talk about phones that cost between $1,500 and $2,000 US dollars.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there is that big of a market for this kind of thing. I mean, I guess most people, myself included, are pretty happy with whatever's in between 5 and 6 inches, even below that. And having the foldable design is not, I don't know, I'm not sold yet. I'm just not sold yet. But I mean, the nerd in me, of course, wants to play with it, wants to have it. And I do hope that I will be able to get my hands on it. But as a mass product, rather than a niche product, I'm not sold.
Yeah, neither am I. And I think, of course the nerd in me wants to see it and try it. And I mean, I think that's kind of a given, right? Like, I mean, who doesn't? I think if you're a nerd, you want to see this thing. Whether you're going to want to own it or buy it or even use it is a different story, because I feel like if you remember the Galaxy Note Edge, that was the first with a display, water falling on the side of the phone. The Edge obviously was a lot bigger than the dual edges on the modern phone, the Infinity display that we have on the Galaxies now, because they quickly realized that using that edge, nobody really cared about. But making a phone that almost looks edgeless on left and right, using that same technology of a curved OLED or basically an OLED display that isn't flat, is an interesting solution. And they've done that, and they've differentiated design-wise, aesthetically, by doing that. So I think that, that's how that technology evolved. And I'm thinking that's what's going to happen with the folding phones. The first 2 or 3 years of it, or 2 years of it, are going to be very awkward, is what I'm expecting. Just that's my take. But I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, the way I am seeing it is that we're talking about 2 different subsets of double screen phones. We have the ones with a normal form factor that has a screen on top and down the bottom. And on the other hand, we have the foldable phones that basically also have 2 screens, but they can be folded into one. So, I mean, one way or the other, I think one of this is going to stick.
Yeah. I'm
not sure if both will.
Yeah, I don't know either. You're right. And I think that's one of the things that, it's a little murkier for me to kind of predict this, and my pretty confident thoughts on removing the notches and the hole punches, or rather keeping them and covering them up. I think that, look, it's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to it. That's really all I can say at this point.
And also, by the way, when we unfold this phone, so we basically get an Android tablet. I'm not sure that Android has been that great with tablets so far. I haven't used an Android tablet in years. Are they still a thing? Are they actually any good?
No, they're not. I mean, some people here, some listeners will probably be mad at me for saying this, and I don't care, because I've always thought Android tablets were terrible. They've never been good. They've been attempts to make them better, but it's never stuck. I mean, certainly Samsung makes some very nice tablets. They're very competitive in terms of hardware with the iPad and iPad Pro. But at the same time, although the latest iPad Pro is pretty much trumped everything else in the business in terms of hardware, in my opinion. But I'm sure Samsung will catch up. And the software, though, is always what leaves it down. Like, I mean, you can make a beautiful Samsung, that shows that, obviously, with their current set of tabs, but you can make a beautiful Samsung tablet, Android tablet, and Samsung does, but the software experience is terrible. It always is this, because there's no ecosystem of tablet optimized apps, and iPad still suffers from that. Instagram on iPad is still not a tablet optimized experience. But that's the minority of the apps on iPad, I think, in terms of like popular apps. And I think the iPad does have that kind of in-between tablet optimized ecosystem that is lacking on Android. And I know Google's tried really hard several times. There was the Pixel C tablet. Currently, they're trying to, redo it with Chrome OS and the Pixel Slate, which has been a complete, dud. And I think a lot of it has to do with, some software that's not very optimized on the Slate, which I think is the biggest issue. But if you want to run Chrome OS like they're doing on the Slate, then you need a device that's more versatile and can be a 2-in-1, because Chrome OS works best with a keyboard and trackpad. And then Android becomes kind of like a sidekick, right? Because you can run Android apps, but that's not the main purpose. Whereas a phone like this is going to be a phone evolved into a tablet, which basically means that the only thing I expect us to be able to do, Andrii, is have two apps side by side on that phone. Like, basically be able to emulate two displays at the same time, but they're joined, right? That's it.
Yeah, that's about it. I do agree. That's about it. And I would say that right now Microsoft, with its Surface devices and stuff, has a much better chance at making a good tablet-like device rather than any Android vendors.
I agree. And, I don't want to knock the idea of putting two apps side by side on a device. I mean, that can be very productivity-wise, could be very helpful. I'm not saying that it's a bad idea. I'm just saying that anybody who expects this device to transform magically from a good experience, phone-like experience, like what we're used to today, and then switch to a tablet experience, there is no tablet experience for Android. That's what I'm trying to say. So what we're going to see is maybe dual phone real estate, triple phone real estate, like it's in terms of running 2 or 3 apps side by side. That I can see. I think that is a viable thing. Whether it's worth the extra cost and bulk and battery life and other constraints, I'm not convinced. At least initially.
I'm still very curious to see what comes out.
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's in tech like us is a nerd, is an early adopter, is a tech savvy folk, is going to be into it, and I'm looking forward to it too. So we've covered displays quite a bit. Let's you mentioned the headphone jack earlier. Let's talk about that a little bit. I fear that for better or for worse, and I think it's for worse, the headphone jack is going away very rapidly, and we're done now. I feel that OnePlus throwing in the towel with the OnePlus 6T and removing the headphone jack from that phone was to me, that's a lot of people are going to say, well, Apple doing it was the pivot point. Some people are going to say, Huawei doing it, or, others doing it is the turning point. I think OnePlus doing it is the turning point, in my opinion. You could also argue that some of the Galaxy A models don't have a headphone jack, correct? Do you know which ones? Because they're not very popular here in the US.
No, not really. I don't really see that many of them around either.
I'm hearing that the A8 non-S has no headphone jack, and that the A8S has a headphone jack. Please fact check us on this, listeners. Let me know. Tweet at me. Let me know whether that is correct or not. I'm not sure. That's what I read somewhere, and I didn't check it because it's not really that important to me, because I probably will not have a Galaxy A device to play with at any point, sadly. But if Samsung's trying to do it on the A series, I'm pretty sure we're still going to see the headphone jack on the S10, but we might not either. And I'm pretty sure LG will stick with it for a little longer because it's for them a big selling point. Or they could throw up their arms in the air like OnePlus did and completely drop the headphone jack on future LG phones and call it a day, since, they're not doing so hot right now. And look, HTC threw one of their best assets at the time, which was headphone jack, sound quality, high quality headphone amps and DACs. They were one of the early ones to throw it out the window in a way to kind of differentiate. And that certainly did not help their cause. Not that they were going to be doing any better anytime soon. So I don't know. But there's a bunch of articles, and Gadget just published a story written by Dehindra mourning the headphone jack. TechCrunch did the same. Craig Mubarak did a story on mourning the headphone jack. And I'm honestly mourning the headphone jack myself. Are you?
Yeah, I certainly am. For me personally, OnePlus was the last hope. My daily driver is a 5T, and one way or the other, I'm going to change it to something else. And I would love to get another OnePlus, but now that there is no headphone jack, I'm not really sure what to look for. It's not that I use it that much, the headphone jack, but I just like having it. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. Well, on the plus side, pardon the pun, on the plus side, the OnePlus 6 non-T has the headphone jack, and honestly, the difference between those two phones is very minor, especially if you're outside the US, because the T-Mobile partnership and the Verizon compatibility doesn't matter to you.
Right.
And the only thing you lose is a bit of battery life in exchange for three things that I think are better. We discussed this on the show last week with Igor, because the OnePlus 6T ended up being our phone of the year. We decided that the headphone jack, the notification light, and the slightly smaller display, 6.2 inches instead of 6.4 inches, meaning higher pixel density, because it's still 1080p, were the three advantages that for many people would, be balanced out by the more battery life on the 6T, right? So I would say if you are if you can afford an upgrade or are ready for an upgrade, I would say buy a OnePlus 6 now, because they're really cheap, and keep that for another year or two, because this, you can get 99% of the 6T's experience. The camera software has been retroactively made available on the 6, so you get all the advantages of like the night mode that they have and all that good stuff. So I actually think that, frankly, the 6 and 6T are such a huge improvement over the 5 and 5T. Like, they're massively better, that you cannot go wrong here, Andrii.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I have to say that losing the notification light would also suck big time.
Yeah.
It's such a great thing.
I actually don't understand why that went out. I think that I totally understand why the headphone jack went out, because if you look at how it's packaged inside, if you look at iFixit and the teardowns, it's like... that in-display fingerprint reader and that bigger batteries really took away quite a bit of real estate. And now, they could have still put a headphone jack in there somehow, but I think that they had to make a compromise, and that's the compromise they chose to make. But the notification light doesn't make any sense to me. HTC used to have the notification light embedded in the speaker grill, like the earpiece grill. Do you remember that? Like,
yeah. I remember that one.
LEDs are so tiny. They're literally surface mount components that are 1 millimeter in size nowadays. They could have put a surface mount LED and a tiny little light guide right next to that speaker for the entire little speaker hole to light up. I don't know why they didn't do it. That, to me, has to come back on the next generation product. I don't expect the headphone jack will come back. Yeah, but I think the notification light is a really nice thing to have on a phone. And even like phones like the $300 Poco phone has a notification light. Come on, guys.
you keep coming back to that Poco phone.
Dude, the Poco phone is kind of blowing my mind. There's a lot of things about it I don't like. The software is horrendous because it's Xiaomi and it's Skin. It's their MIUI, whatever it's called. But put another launcher on there and you're good to go. The hardware, though, other than being plastic, and it's really good plastic, it's a high-quality plastic. It doesn't feel cheap for plastic, which is surprising. Other than that, everything about that phone is pretty solid. The camera is certainly not as good as even the OnePlus 6 or 6T, but it's not horrible either. It's close, and it's up there. And I don't know if you saw the Marques Brownlee at MKBHD did kind of like put up photos of all the taken with various phones on Twitter and asked people to vote. And the Poco phone was like one of the top phones in terms of imaging that people perceived to be good. The reality is it's not that great as a camera, but people perceived it to be good, which is really interesting, Are they good with the computational camera software? I don't think that's it. No, I don't think the pictures are particularly good. If you should watch that video by Marques. It's really worth watching because people actually voted the BlackBerry better than the iPhone 10. The
okay, this is surprising.
Like basically they didn't know what they were looking at. They were given two pictures on Twitter and they voted, right? And then Marques basically chose. It basically was like a soccer match, like a football match, right? Like he paired phones that are very different in two pairs, and then there was like 8 to start with, or 16 to start with, and he went down to 8, then to 4, then to 2, then to 1, right? That's how he did it. And it's really impressive to see the results are like mind-blowing because none of them match the reality. Like we all know which are the better phones for camera.
Yeah.
And and that's not the end result here at all. But so also, it really shows you how people just when looking at social media they don't even know the difference, you know?
Yeah, but also we all know that some cameras are just so inconsistent, and they can give you a great result at one point, and then in a few hours with a bit of a different light or a different angle or a different scenery, you will just get really crappy images. So consistency is also key, and it's really hard to judge consistency if you just look at a pair of photos, right?
True. But it's interesting. And so, yeah, I'm more in the headphone jack. I wanted to, basically say that there's nothing I can do, but I'm definitely getting annoyed with dongle life. Because even though I have a really fantastic pair of Sony Mark III wireless noise canceling headphones, the latest ones from Sony, they are amazing. They sound amazing. Noise cancellation is amazing. They're comfortable. The battery life is incredible, 30 hours. It is overall one of the best products of the year for me. But it still doesn't sound as good as my Beyerdynamics plugged into a headphone jack. And that's what I want. And I'm still doing that. I'm still listening to my phones with really high-end headphones and also in-ear monitors that are wired, and that's not going to go away. Some of my headphones in my collection are 20 years old and sound phenomenal, and they're not wireless. They're not going to get reissued as a wireless edition. They're wired headphones, and right now I need to find a good adapter every time I want to listen to a phone, and I have several. The best one I have, honestly, of all the adapters is the one that came with the Razer phone. It's the best sounding one. The second best sounding one is and then these are all digital adapters. They're not analog, obviously. They have a DAC and a headphone amp built into them. My second favorite adapter is the Essential phones. And my third, passable, I think it's should be the minimum standard and is decent and acceptable to me, is the Pixel 3 and Pixel 2 adapter. They're different. The Pixel 3 adapter is a little smaller and has a bit less power consumption. And the Pixel 2 adapter is a little bigger and is a little more thirsty on the battery. But both sound pretty solid as a baseline. And one of the worst adapters I've ever listened to is HTC's adapter, just to give you some points of reference. So if you want a good headphone adapter, you go to Razer's website, spend the $29 or whatever it is, or $19. It's not expensive. Buy that USB-C to 3.5 millimeter adapter. It's a little bigger than average, but it sounds absolutely phenomenal. And
try not to lose it somewhere in your house within the first 3 days.
It's a little bigger, so I think you'll have a harder time losing it, but you're absolutely right that the problem with these things is that you end up, it's not so much losing them. I'm pretty good at keeping track of my stuff. The problem is that I don't have it when I need it, right? I left it at home. I left it in my bag. My bag is not with me today. I'm in the car by myself running an errand. And, some of my cars are older and I like connecting through 3.5 millimeter instead of Bluetooth. And it's not an issue in my Tesla, obviously, but my older Porsche, for example, I have a really great stereo in that car. It is phenomenal. But I've, basically got a little 3.5 millimeter aux input on that, and it's the only thing that'll sound good. So, because I don't want to listen to cassettes or CDs, which is the other, or FM radio, which is the other three options. And they don't let me just, choose my own music. There's no USB ports or anything. So I'm basically stuck with the aux input, which is fine. You're going to say, put a good Bluetooth receiver on that. But again, no, Bluetooth receiver, such a pain, I just want to have a simple solution that I know will work with anything. And that's what I feel like the worst part is we didn't have to remove it. And we didn't have to lose the headphone jack.
No, that's true. And I mean, we're not there yet with Bluetooth. One way or the other, we're just not there yet. And there are still issues and they're not going anywhere. No matter how expensive are going to be your devices, you will still get these short, really annoying pauses coming up every day. Maybe you will hear it once, maybe even less, but still it will annoy the hell out of you. At least it does out of me.
I agree. 30. Yeah, I think it's I feel like my Sonys are excellent, but in very noisy RF environments, where there's a lot of interference from if you're in an airport, in a public place where a lot of Bluetooth, a lot of Wi-Fi, I every now and then have dropouts. They're not very long. As you said, it happens very rarely, but I've heard it and it drives me nuts. Here's the other problem. And this is just using the regular SBC codec. If I'm using aptX, it's even more likely to drop out because the bandwidth is much higher on aptX. And aptX HD sounds fantastic over wireless. Here's the problem though, right? My Sony headphones, like a lot of Sony headphones, the only thing I don't like about them, the wireless noise canceling ones, the Mark IIIs, is that they're a little too bass heavy for my liking, for my taste. I like my headphones to be super neutral, and they're a little too bass heavy. And I think for a lot of people that works because they like the bass heavy, and also when you're in a loud environment, even with noise canceling, it's nice to have a little more thumpy bass. But I use the built-in EQ in the Sony app. I found a curve that works for me that makes the headphones sound really natural and really flat. And so if I want to have that EQ enabled in the Sony headphones, I need to turn off aptX. There's not enough compute power for it to do the in-headphone EQ, right? Because that EQ you're adjusting on the Sony app actually adjusts the DSP inside the headphones. So there's not enough processing power in these headphones for the DSP to do onboard EQ plus aptX encoding. So I have to pick. Do I want an EQ curve that satisfies my listening, and then I have a lesser quality codec and some lossy audio? Or do I want lossless audio, but then I can't adjust the EQ, right? And then the other thing is if I use them wired, again, you can use them wired and that bypasses the Bluetooth, but the noise canceling still works, which is great. Yeah. I can't use the EQ when they're wired. I don't know why the EQ doesn't work. Even the built-in EQ doesn't work.
That's kind of weird though.
I think it's because the noise canceling is a separate chip on this headphone than the actual EQ and Bluetooth chip. So they can enable the noise canceling without enabling the Bluetooth, which is great because the Bluetooth takes less power when it's turned off. So if you use them wired, your battery life is even better, but you still get noise canceling. So I think they have the EQ stuff that's in headphone is done in the Bluetooth chip, or at least in the DSP that's attached to the Bluetooth chip, not in the noise canceling chip. So it's really frustrating because like I'm talking here about problems that 99% of you are not even going to care about. I know, I'm sorry, but I'm an audiophile. I can't deal with these are the little nitty gritty things that nobody talks about that you have to deal with when you are passionate about sound quality and you're trying to live through this transition of no headphone jack wireless, right? When every headphone is wireless aptX HD or some other lossless codec and doesn't drop audio every now and then and lets me do EQ on the headphone, assuming, the headphones are not perfect in the first place, which, as I said, those Sonys are close, but not quite. Then I think I'll be able to be happy with wireless. But right now I can't. There's still too many little things,
Yeah, that just sounds like a mess. But I guess if you are an audiophile, you kind of have to get used to dealing with stuff like this.
I know, but it did used to be so much simpler. I used to just be able to plug headphones into a phone, and if the phone had a decent DAC and amp, I'd be happy as pie.
Right. Do you think Bluetooth 5 is going to solve stuff for you?
Well, no, because these headphones are Bluetooth 5 compliant and they have aptX HD. And as I said, the limitations right now is that I can't EQ and do that at the same time. And Bluetooth 5 doesn't seem to improve anything. It reduces latency. I've noticed that when watching TV with the headphones, but it doesn't reduce. I mean, it's still subject to interference.
Right. So a good prediction for next year would be that there's going to be still a lot of mourning for 3.5 millimeter jacks.
And I think even more phones without headphone jack. As I said, the verdict is up in the air about the Galaxy S10 dropping it or not. If Samsung was smart, they could capitalize one more year on, yes, we are the only ones left of the big players with a headphone jack. And that would, I think, be a good marketing bullet point for them. They certainly are not going to do it for the money.
I think LG is going to do that.
What?
I would say that LG is going to do that as well.
Yeah, I'm hoping LG and Samsung stay true to their roots. But look, I was hoping OnePlus would stay true to their roots, and they betrayed us.
Yes, that is true.
I hate to say this, but that's maybe a heavy word to use, but I feel that way. Like I did my OnePlus 6T review on Geekspin. I actually said that. I said that I didn't use the word betray, but I said that if I had to choose between the OnePlus 6T and the OnePlus 6 right now, considering they're identical phones other than battery life, headphone jack, and notification light, I would pick the 6 because you'd get all the advantages of the improved software of the 6T. And you would lose a little bit of battery life, but it's not really enough of an issue. And then I would have my headphone jack and my notification light. And honestly, the in-display fingerprint reader is slower. It was pretty reliable, but it's slower. And I don't want slow. I want to, I love having the fingerprint reader on the back of my phone because I reach in my pocket and I touch the fingerprint reader in my pocket on the back of the phone, and I pull out the phone, and by the time it's halfway out my pocket, it's unlocked. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I do as well.
So, yeah, I sound like an old person. Get off my lawn. Kids these days with their Wi-Fi and their Bluetooth and their wireless, Andrii.
Yeah, that's
anyway.
That's what it is, though.
Other predictions. We've talked about headphones, talked about audio. Let's talk about camera predictions because that's a huge part of phones today. So my thoughts are we're going to see phones with more lenses, more sensors. I wouldn't be surprised if the P30 has 4 cameras in the back instead of 3, that they bring back the monochrome. So basically have a telephoto, a normal color, high, like large megapixel sensor, like they have today on the Mate 20 Pro and the P20 Pro. And then a wide angle, like they have on the Mate 20 Pro, like ultra wide, and then a monochrome comes back that's currently only on the P20 Pro. So for now, you have the best of everything. Like you can do your pure monochrome photography and so that's kind of I think where Huawei is going to go. Samsung, I think they're going to do 3. They're going to do like the V40 and the Mate 20 Pro. They're going to do tele, regular, ultra wide, and because we know the regular is already wide. Right. And then they're going to keep their dual aperture thing going on the regular, I think, because that's like their thing. And that's a pretty impressive feat of engineering, to be honest. I mean, I'm not sure it resulted in particularly better photos when you see what Google is able to do with computational photography. But speaking of that, I think that, we're going to see more and more computational stuff happening on even I think a lot of the computational tricks we're seeing on flagships today are going to migrate to mid-ranges this year because the mid-range chips are going to be finally able to do that. We're going to talk about this in a few minutes, but the MediaTek P90 that was announced recently, for example, is a mid-range chip, and it has some really heavy-duty computational photography chops built in. So I think we're heading in that direction. And then we're going to see some phones like the Nokia with 5 cameras, some phones maybe with more. I think that the future is an array of cameras on your phone that are very basic in the sense that have really good sensors, really good lenses, but no mechanical moving parts, no autofocus, no OIS, no mechanical things, just an array of lenses with sensors behind them, and then a whole shit ton of computational power applied to all these sensors, able to do things like vary the angle after the fact, vary the depth of field and focus after the fact, vary all kinds of parameters after the fact. But we need more processing power, and I think we're going to see that with the Snapdragon 855. We're going to see that with maybe the new Kirin chip from Huawei and other stuff,
Yeah, we're certainly getting there. I'm pretty sure we're getting there, and I'm pretty sure that next year we are going to have a much better photography, much better shots coming out of our phones. I think is just basically only moving forward, and now we're gonna have more great hardware, so camera arrays that you mentioned, and we're gonna have better software, and we're gonna have a lot of computing power with the new chips. So this is the perfect storm, I think, for mobile photography and like for people who are enthusiastic about it, and you are, as far as I have seen.
Yeah, I think you are too.
Yeah, I'm trying my best. I'm not that big of a fan of my current camera in 5T, but generally I'm very interested. That's true.
Yeah, I think the 6, if you upgrade to that or the 6T, is a huge step forward.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons for me to think about it.
It's
honestly.
really a big improvement. It's really surprising. I mean, I could get some good results out of the OnePlus 5 and 5T, but it was kind of meh. Whereas this is like, okay, this can hold its own kind of like at the bottom end of the flagship tier, you know, still run with some of the bigger players.
Yeah, and I really like the idea of having the choice between the lenses. So telephoto.
I think the creative control
angle.
that gives you is really impressive. Like, I understand that you can do a lot with one lens and one sensor. Obviously, Google has shown that, because I still think that if you just want to take random photos quickly and you're like just not a photographer and just not a normal human, or normal mobile user, as I like to call them, normobs, you're just going to want to mash that button, that shutter button, and the Pixel 3 and Pixel 3 XL are going to be the absolute best bet you have if you want the best photos on average by just mashing the button. But if you like,
he's doing a great job.
You know, and me for sure, but maybe you as well, where you like to wander around and take photos, and like when we were in Ukraine together, taking photos on that walk, remember? Like. Yep. You know, it's fun. You take photos, you compare things, you try it out. It's fun. And I like to do that a lot. So for me, the creative aspects are really important. But I think where we see more computational stuff, I'm not sure. Like, I think the other thing we're going to see more of, we're starting to see a little bit of this, is obviously depth sensing in the front camera for you know, like time of flight, full 3D mapping for unlocking, like for Face ID equivalents. That's starting to happen. We see that on Mate 20 Pro, on the Oppo Find X. But we're going to see, I think, that the same kind of setup in the rear now. We're going to see more cameras that are capable of capturing metadata beyond the actual image in the back for, you know, refocusing after the fact, like more accurate, faster autofocus, AI-driven autofocus, that sort of stuff. I think that a lot of that additional hardware is just going to be sitting there in the same way as nowadays we have like a flash for assisting with light. We have like maybe a laser autofocus module. Like, there'll be all these extra little sensors that are infrared cameras and projectors and things on the back of the phone and the front of the phone. The front of the phone, I think, it's a challenge because, again, if you want to, you know, the future is like that bezel-less full screen display. So, you know, if you want a lot of sensors in the front, you have to do a notch. Look at the iPhone. But that conflicts with that tendency of like the whole punch hole thing. So I think there's a bit of a conflict there. There's a bit of a paradox there that needs to be resolved. And I think that people are going to opt for basically a simpler front camera, for aesthetics reasons, and we're going to probably see these rear camera being more fancied up with depth sensing and 3D sensing. That's my call.
Yeah, and that's but that's also a problem that you see kind of solved by the double screen phones, right? You don't need your selfie camera anymore because you have a phone, a screen on the back, and then your normal camera array becomes your selfie camera.
True, it is definitely something that is an option, but I'm just not convinced that the dual screen thing is viable long term. It's expensive, it takes up more real estate, sacrifices battery life, etc. I don't know. I think it's interesting, and we're probably going to see more. But let's see what happens. I think that was an interesting gimmick, but I'm not sure it's going to be a common thing.
Do you remember that phone that had a normal screen and then on the other side it had an e-ink screen called Yota phone?
Yeah, I remember the Yota phone. I have the Yota phone 2 somewhere in a drawer here.
It was an interesting thing, I have to say. I'm really surprised that it never actually went into more mainstream and nobody ever tried to do something similar afterwards.
Yeah,
kind of quietly died.
I don't know why. It was a very interesting phone. And I like that you could use it at least the second gen. I had both the Yota Phone 1 and the Yota Phone 2. That the Yota Phone 2 actually had a full touchscreen enabled e-ink in the back. So you could actually use the phone as an e-ink reader without having to install special software, because you could run Android on the back screen and the e-paper display. It was a little slow, like you couldn't watch a YouTube video, for example. But you could use it as a viewfinder. You could use it to do like Kindle app or, to read a website. And then you could, of course, anything you wanted, you could leave on the screen, right? So if you had like a map, directions on Google Maps, you could leave it on the back of the screen without having to ever turn on the phone. You could just look at the back of the screen and am I still on track, Yeah,
your shopping list, whatever, it was practical.
Correct, yeah. Or a boarding pass. That was another good example, a boarding pass one, yeah. So I think you're right. That would be cool to see a comeback of that.
Doesn't seem to be coming back next year, though. But it would be great.
I doubt it. People are so invested in color now and OLED and all that. Yeah, so we should probably talk about some of the news items in the podcast now, but I'm wondering if there's anything else that sticks out to you in terms of like technology we're going to see on phones next year. Obviously, we haven't talked about processor or battery life, mostly because what's going to happen. It's going to be a one-trick pony, Snapdragon 855, at least in the West. We're going to see Kirin 990 at the end of next year from Huawei. We're going to see an Exynos chip from Samsung, but I don't think it's going to be very competitive. Last year's wasn't very competitive. And we're going to see the MediaTek P90 in the mid-range. I think it's going to take a lot of phones are going to come out with that chip. It looks very interesting, that chip.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one.
I was in Taiwan. They briefed me on the chip in October, November, whenever it was. And I have to say, MediaTek needs to market themselves better. They're doing some really cool stuff. And I look at a phone like the Palm, and I want to mention that for a reason, because it's kind of a good segue to our news items. I look at the phone like the Palm, and the Palm is Snapdragon 435, I think. It's powered by like a mid-range or 450 or something, like a not mid-range, lower mid-range chip that's pretty old now. And it's 28 nanometer chip, so it's not very power efficient. Imagine you could put a 10 or 12 nanometer chip instead in there, and maybe a MediaTek chip instead of like a P60 or even that P90, and it probably would be just as cost effective for Palm. Like they could make a phone that sells for $200 to $300, and retain all the benefits that they have today, but add a lot more performance and, more importantly, much better battery life, which is their big issue if you use that phone without their do not disturb mode turned on, which is obviously the way they want you to use the phone. But if you turn that off, it's like 4-hour battery life, like 4 hours, like not screen on time. I'm talking about like just having the phone in your hand or in your pocket. But if you turn on the do not disturb mode, it lasts for a day, no problem. So to me, because it's 800 milliamp hour battery, right? Like think of that for a second.
Yeah, that's good and adequate.
I think the second gen phone should have a MediaTek chip instead of a Qualcomm chip. And I know it's a tough sell in the US because Qualcomm obviously has a lot of the, is more popular because of supporting Verizon and Sprint better, especially with this legacy CDMA stuff. But I feel like, they should look at least for some markets. And I'm bringing that up because, I did a video, you should check it out. I'll put it in the show notes. I show you how to change the SIM on that phone. And it's unlocked from the factory, even if you buy it from Verizon, which is really interesting. A lot of Verizon phones have been unlocked in the past, but in the last year, they started locking their phones again. So the Palm is unlocked from the factory, and if you buy it from Verizon, it's unlocked. But the thing that a lot of people why did you make a video about removing the SIM on this phone? Because, we all know how to remove a SIM. No, you don't, because that phone does not have a normal SIM tray, there's a hole. First of all, the hole is super tiny. You need a piece of metal that's 0.5 millimeters in diameter. That's half a millimeter to go in that hole. It's too small for a regular SIM tool. And secondly, you don't push on it. If you try to push on that hole, nothing happens because there's just metal behind it. What you have to do is have a little hook on that piece of metal that's super tiny, half a millimeter maybe piece of metal, and that you insert in there, and then you pull on the tray. You don't actually push on it. And it took me a while to figure this out, and then once I did, I was able to verify that the phone works fine on other GSM networks, like T-Mobile and AT&T in the US. And I'm sure it has probably enough bands to work perfectly fine in the rest of the world in most countries. So that was why I think this video is interesting.
Yeah, that's a really strange one. I watched your video, and but first of all, I was actually surprised that the phone doesn't come with a SIM removal tool.
Well, no, because it's sold by Verizon exclusively, and Verizon locks you in. Remember, you have to buy the phone from them for $350, and then you can only get the phone if you agree to add a $10 a month second line to your account. Like, you have to already have a main line, and then, basically in the US, a lot of the smartwatches and smart devices, you can get an extra line.
Right.
But you can't start with just one line and you put that phone on there or put a smartwatch on there. Most of the carriers, operators here are basically like, you get a line from us for your main device, your phone, whatever. And if you want, like, for a small extra fee a month, you can get a second SIM for your smartwatch or tablet or whatever, right? And that's what they're doing with that Palm phone. But that's the only way you can get it. Right?
It sounds like a really tough sell to me.
It's a very tough sell. But, I think the reason Palm did this is because they needed to get the initial investment to be able to make this phone basically as a nobody company, right? Like, I've worked for small startups that do hardware like Pebble. It's so hard to get custom parts made for you. The Palm has a custom display. It's 3.3 inches, 720p. That's like 445 DPI. It's pretty awesome. And for the size, and it's, I think, 18:9. Like, it's a wider aspect ratio than standard. So basically the phone has very little bezel on the sides and just a tiny chin top and bottom. So it's actually a really nice display. It's IPS, but it looks very OLED. The blacks are really inky black. It's just a great display. And I thought because TCL is their manufacturing partner, that TCL provided the display, right? Mm-hmm. But I did a bit of digging around. It looks like it's a custom-made display. I don't know who makes it, but it was not made by TCL. And so they had to get the tooling, all that done. So, they probably had to find somebody to finance them and help them creating this display, which is probably a big investment up front. And so, they partnered with Verizon. They kind of sold their soul to the devil in many ways, right?
Yeah,
and I think until that exclusive agreement ends, they're going to be stuck with that,
Right. Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, we, I guess, in this case, can expect the second gen to be more refined and more adequate to the reality of the market.
Totally, and that's kind of why I think this, this kind of ties it back into what we were talking about with the P90. I think the MediaTek Helio, it will be a good choice of chip, I think, for this phone. Is kind of how I'm seeing it. So anyway, speaking of kind of milestones, Huawei shipped 200 million phones this year. Saw this on Engadget. I'll put it in the show notes. That's a lot of phones, isn't it?
It is. It's. I didn't really follow that closely what they've been doing over the year, but the number is just huge.
I mean, they are number 2 pretty much right now. They're in the top 3 for sure, and they're probably in the top 2, and that changes all the time. But like, this kerfuffle with the U.S. regime that we have today, which is terrible, is not really hurting their business, which
not at all.
I think it's very interesting, and that's why I wanted to put it out. I mean, you can't ignore this kind of news. You have to be attentive to it. I wanted to get your thoughts. We were talking about headphone jacks before, and we talked a bit about wireless headphones. I told you folks about my Sony Mark III, which I think are phenomenal. And of course, I've been testing other earbuds and headphones over the last year. And the most recent one is the Zolo Liberty Plus. You can watch my unboxing video. I'll put the link in the show notes. That is a very... It's kind of trying to be an AirPod but failing, like a lot of the AirPod, copycats. And I'm not talking about aesthetically copying the AirPods. I'm talking about making completely independent, unwired, wireless earbuds. Basically, earbuds that are 2 separate pieces you put in your ear, not that are attached by a little cord that goes behind your neck, which is why a lot of the wireless Bluetooth headphones earbuds are like. So my take on the Zolo Liberty Plus is that they sound kind of meh, but everything else about it was pretty good. Like, they paired easily, they kept in sync, they had pretty good imaging, which means that they had pretty good timing in terms of sending the signal to both earbuds simultaneously, and they had good battery life, and generally pretty good. They're also noise canceling. Other than the sound quality was a big letdown. I have a pair of Sony wireless earbuds that are very similar, that 2 individual earbuds that are completely wireless and separate from each other. And they sound better, but they are not as good in terms of ease of pairing and or noise canceling. So I don't think anybody, and this is again, Andrii, I want your thoughts on this. Like, how is it possible that nobody's done something as good as AirPods yet? It's been 2 years, more than 2 years, I think, since the AirPods were launched. It kind of blows my mind. I know that Xiaomi makes a set and Huawei makes a set that is supposedly really great, but I haven't seen a product that I can buy here in the US at least easily that can compete at all with the AirPods.
Yeah, this is really strange. I do agree. Like, I myself use just normal earbuds with a wire between them, but I do look at these true wireless, whatever it's called, the standard now, earbuds, and I don't know. Maybe not everybody is convinced, and by everybody, I mean the vendors and manufacturers. Maybe they're not convinced yet that there is such a market for that. Because, I mean, maybe it might be laziness, but it seems to me that most of them are still kind of falling for producing the normal earbuds and not really caring that much about the supposed high-end true wireless stuff.
I mean, yeah, I can see that, but the Zolo Liberty Plus that I played with, they're $140. I mean, they're about the same price as a pair of AirPods. They're, they use the true wireless Qualcomm. Actually, no, they use the MediaTek version of that, but they use basically some sort of true wireless system. And so, what I'm saying is like, I'm just surprised. Like, before anybody chimes up, and tweets at me, like, I know that Apple has a W1 chip and it's a custom solution that works best with iPhones. But even if you use AirPods with just an Android phone, they are solid. They work well. They sync properly. Everything is, and the wireless performance is really good. So I don't think it's just a W1 chip here. Now, granted, the AirPods don't have noise canceling, and they, in my opinion, don't sound that good. But the convenience and the lightweight and the design is what's really impressive about the AirPods. They are so small, so light. That's why
Zolo looks pretty big.
There's very big. And the AirPods are super popular here in the US. Like, everyone has them, even like though they're still pretty pricey. So all this came up because my good friend Evan Spence at Forbes wrote a story about Nokia just released true wireless earbuds. And they look really cool because the charging case looks like one of those old Nokia chargers cylinders from back in the day, the battery pack, whatever you want to call it, Nokia USB-based auxiliary battery. So they look like these old packs, and then you put the earbuds in it. And the earbuds look like tiny, like the Bullet Wireless from OnePlus, the wired ones, but without the wire. They're really quite small. So that's kind of why that kind of got my interest, because I'm like, now I'm wondering if I can get some of these to try out, because they look pretty small, and maybe they're the first ones that are kind of half decent,
Yeah, those look pretty good. Did they announce the price tag?
I didn't read well, it's been a while since I read the article. Let me have a look.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I think these are just... But anyway, I'm sure they're less... They got to be competitive with the AirPods. So, so it'll be really interesting to see. I'm going to try to get...
They look so much less bulky if you compare it to
exactly.
the Liberty
I'm going to try
Plus.
to get myself a pair. And then I don't remember if you followed when you were still at Engadget that Intel Volt smart glasses, they made these smart glasses. They were really small and light and basically just had a little monochrome laser display that would draw onto your retina directly.
Yeah.
And those kind of like were Verge got the kind of exclusive coverage on them initially, and then everybody else got to play with them. And it looked like Intel was gonna, not sell this as a product because Intel doesn't make products, but basically partner with someone to make this happen. And then they announced that they were dropping it, that they were abandoning the project. And so we were all devastated. The Verge wrote a story a few days ago that a company called North is going to take over this project. They acquired the patents from Intel. So expect to see these glasses come to life as a product at some point soon. I think this is very, very exciting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So yeah, as far as I understand, they're basically North is going to get all the Vaunt IP and integrate it in their own product. And unlike the initial font, it's going to be color, right? So it's going to be actual image in actual color projected onto your retina.
Exactly.
It sounds amazing. And recently, actually, I got a chance to play for maybe like 10 or 15 minutes with HoloLens and Magic Leap.
Oh, yeah, me too.
And I have to say that I was a little bit underwhelmed. I mean, I knew that HoloLens is not a great, not the best AR experience ever there has been. And I knew that Magic Leap was supposed to be so much better than HoloLens. And then, I don't know, to me it felt more incremental than I expected. And the field of view is still pretty narrow. So, I mean, I see where we're going, but I also can say that at this particular point, AR is pretty far from where some people would like to tell us.
Yeah, I think you're going to have a better AR experience on your phone right now, honestly. So you also try Magic Leap. Did you think Magic Leap was better than HoloLens? Because I've tried both and I have my opinion there.
I think that it is better. I think the field of view is better, and also it's not as big and it doesn't feel as unwieldy. That's my take.
It's exactly my take. Definitely a better field of view. Definitely lighter and smaller, and also felt that the objects felt more glued to the world. Like
right.
The Magic Leap really did a very good job at being able to like superimpose, virtual stuff on top of the real world, and keep it there, no jitter. Mind you, it's been a few years since I used the HoloLens, and I'm sure it's improved drastically. And Magic Leap I just used in the last month, so obviously, I haven't used the HoloLens recently. But when I used HoloLens back it was very good in terms of keeping the virtual world on top of the real world. But it still had some jitter. Every now and then you could see things kind of like do a little dance, and it kind of killed the experience a little bit. Anyway, So I want to ask you before we wrap up, what is the thing, since we're talking about the future of next year, 2019, future phones, what is the one thing that you're the most excited about? Like, not thing technology-wise, but if there's a phone right now that has been kind of started to leak, which one is the one that has you most excitement, interest, attention?
That's a good question. Just a sec, before I go into this, I just checked my notes and I saw that I forgot one big thing that I wanted to mention. And
okay.
Since we're talking, we're talking about tech, but one of the predictions that I was thinking about in advance of this conversation, it has less to do with the actual hardware tech, but maybe more to do with software tech. But what I saw recently, and what I do think we're going to see more of next year, is that there's going to be more good web-based apps rather than native apps. I'm talking about Android right now, but I went to a conference called Slush in Finland, in Helsinki.
Oh yeah, Slush, yeah, that's a great conference.
It's a great one, and this was the first time where I saw an actual web app that is exactly like a native app. It's is this one of these progressive web apps, that's the Google terminology, that can be actually put on your home screen. You can just run it from your home screen. It is totally web-based. It just caches some stuff. It can work offline, and you don't see the difference. And then I talked to a few people around, and everybody says that basically the opportunities for this are getting bigger and bigger, and the possibilities and what you can do with just web-based apps are getting wider and wider. And it seems to me that at some point, I don't think the app stores will just die down or whatever, but we are definitely going to see more of web-based apps that would just jump at us from our browsers and just basically with a suggesting that you put them on your home screen and run it from there. And mind you, when you run this app from your home screen, you don't even see the URL bar. It's just an app. Wow. Impressive. Yeah, I mean, look, I've always thought that web apps would be the future, but it never really came to be. Like WebOS was a good example of that, right? And I think there's some merit in that. I think that if you can have a similar experience using web apps, it's so much easier to develop. Maybe. I mean, I'm not a web developer, so I don't know. But I would assume that it's probably easier to develop than native app.
And then the other thing is, it was always an issue of like the horsepower you needed to run the web app versus native app. And I think that's going away because the processors are so fast now. We're kind of getting at that point. Remember like 5, 10, more than 10 years ago now, but maybe 10, 15 years ago when laptops all were good enough. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like it didn't matter what you threw, unless you played video games or something. It didn't matter what you threw at a computer and it could manage it okay.
Yeah.
I think we're kind of getting there with smartphones too,
It does seem so. It does seem so. And getting back to the question that you asked, I'm still, I was thinking today about things that I really liked, like leaking over the past few years that never made it anywhere. Do you remember the idea of the Ubuntu phone? The one that was supposed to power your desktop just by being there. I mean, if we got something similar to that, that would be amazing, and I would be totally up for trying it. And I think that this is something we could get close to just thanks to ARM processors being everywhere and having all this sort of convergence with Chrome OS devices and just smaller ARM-based devices and Windows going on ARM and stuff like that. So maybe somewhere in there, we could have still that same concept that was on the basis of the Ubuntu phone all these years ago.
Yeah, I think I'm excited about, computers running ARM chips and using our phones as a main computer by docking it. I think all this is something that we should definitely keep an eye out for. I just got a Lenovo Yoga C630, which is their Snapdragon 850 based laptop running Windows 10. And honestly, it's really impressive, the performance. I mean, it feels a little slower, but not that bad. It's perfectly usable. I don't get frustrated. And of course, always on, always connected, LT connectivity anywhere, anytime, and really great battery life. So there's a lot to be said there for sure.
Yeah, this is such a difference from what we have right now. Even if we talk about the newer Apple's laptops and Microsoft laptops, can they still be called laptops? They're more like tablets with small keyboards attached to them, but still, you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Well, listen, we should wrap it up. Andrii, will you tell people where they can find you on the internet, your Twitter, Instagram, the website, etc.?
Absolutely. So as I said at the beginning, I'm writing for tech.eu, so most of my writing output is there. So it's just tech.eu. We cover everything that is about the European startup ecosystem, from technology to funding rounds to everything else. As for myself, my Twitter handle is at A Degeler, so the first letter of my first name and then my last name. Same thing on Instagram. Find me, tweet at me, and let's talk. Thank you so much for having me today, Miriam. It's just amazing. I really like talking to you. Yeah, no, thanks for being on the show. You guys know, everybody, the folks listening, where to find me. I'm at Tankgirl on Twitter. That's TNKGRL, like the comic book character, but you drop the vowels. That's also my handle on Instagram. And there is a complimentary YouTube channel to this podcast, the Mobile Tech Podcast channel. It's youtube.com/Miriam Joire, my full name spelled out, Miriam with a Y. And you'll find unboxing, hands-ons, whatever I can get my, that I find interesting, I'll put up on there. Now, sometimes I even do reviews, but those are mostly covered on the actual podcast itself. So, don't forget to subscribe to that YouTube channel, like the videos, tell your friends, and more importantly, if you happen to just be listening to this show for the first time, this podcast for the first time, do subscribe to the podcast. mobiletechpodcast.com is the URL. On Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Overcast, TuneIn Radio, pretty much everywhere you can find the show. So I hope you subscribe and tell your friends. Finally, before we go, Andrii, I want to thank our sponsor, Audible. Audible.com is where it's at if you want to listen to books instead of read them. It's a great platform for audiobooks. There's a link in the show notes below that you can click through to get 30 days free trial and at the same time support the podcast. So if you're not with Audible yet and you've been thinking about joining because you want to listen to books or you can't read books because maybe you're driving at the time you want to read, so that doesn't work very well, so you can listen to them instead,
I suggest you click through the show notes link. It's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. So support the podcast, click through, join Audible. You don't have to stay. You don't have to pay anything. You get 30 days free. Thanks again, Andrii, for being on the show. It was really awesome to have you on, especially between Christmas and New Year's like this.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed the end of the year.
I will. Happy holidays to you and to everyone else listening. I'll have a show before CS with a special guest, so stay tuned for a show next week. Cheers, everybody.
See you around.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.